Does everyone knows about the CEUs? If you're an ag professional, there's a sign-up sheet at the registration desk. Go there. I'm going to get right into the content here. I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Robin Verson, and I work part-time for the Organic Association of Kentucky. But my farming history in the South began with the man that you are here to listen to. I met Jeff Poppen in 1998. I was a young, aspiring farmer, and here we are. I'm still farming. So Jeff must have done something right, maybe.
Despite all of my education, they still become farmers.
One of the most experienced growers in the region. An honor to have him part of my farming journey, and a bigger honor to introduce him to y'all. There's no one better to talk about onions than Jeff Poppen, Long Hungry Creek Farm. Let's do it, Jeff. Use this one.
Hello. Holy shit, there's a lot of people here. I need to click my clip. This thing here. Yeah, we're going to talk about onions, looks like. So, some of you might have been in my class a couple days ago. I'm going to have to repeat some stuff, so bear with me. I feel like the crop is grown before the seed is even sown. The preparation of your land beforehand, years in advance, is so important. It's not like you can just go plow some land up and plant onions. That will not work. I've tried it. As a matter of fact, most of the things that I talk about here are because I've tried a whole bunch of other things that didn't work. I've been farming for 50 years on this piece of land. This is where that little house down there is where Robin lived. I live there now. And it's a mixed hardwood forest, and I feel like the forest is connected to those fields and the pastures. There's an underground network of fungal hyphae that connects this whole farm. And as I walk the boundaries, it's like the skin of my farm. And everything that happens within that farm is sort of more or less, I like to say, my fault. Either I'm messing up, I'm eroding soil, or I'm building soil. Whatever's happening, I'm responsible for what's going on there. And it's the mixture of a couple dozen head of cattle that roam around this farm and the pastures that I move them from. That's what creates the fertility. And once I've fed my cows and I've fed my family, then I'm okay to sell stuff. But I really can't do that until I take care of everything on the farm that supports the people that work on the farm and the animals that make the farm. So this is a real important part of the way I view agriculture, is it stems from cattle. A cow can live off of 2 acres and make 4 acres fertile. That's the key to farming. We have to realize that throughout history, it's the ruminants being mob grazed around fields that make soils, whether it's lions chasing wildebeest in Africa or wolves chasing deer up in Eurasia or the bison, chased by wolves here. Every soil is made by cows. And so that's the basis of agriculture. The main fertilizer is cattle manure. And so in a mixed vegetable farm, we have maybe 5 acres of vegetables now, up to 10 acres at one point in my life. Kind of went up and then went kind of going back down as I get older. But you can sort of see the little crops and the different things. Most of the fertility is dropped on those pastures by the cattle. But in the wintertime, I feed out hay that grew during May and September that the cows couldn't eat. Grass was growing too much, so I made 100, 125 rolls of hay, and then I feed that out, and that's where we get the compost that we put on these fields, and it's about 30 tons per acre per year. I would used up to 40, 50, 75 tons per acre. I'm not going to grow a garden unless I have that amount of compost. Because once you put that amount of compost on and you've remineralized and you learn tillage, you don't have any problems. Things grow great. And so it's up to us to create the humus for our plants to grow in. If we don't do a good job of that, diseases and insects will come in. Mother Nature sends them in and says, here, I'll help you make the humus. That doesn't make us any money. We need to make the humus ourselves, and so that we can grow crops with no trouble. We do everything on 44-inch centers with a Farmall tractor. This is a 140. They made these tractors for almost 20 years. There's 6 million of them. And when tobacco went out, these tractors became highly available. A few $1,000s. I don't think I ever paid more than $2,500 for one. Yeah. And you notice that I have more than one. That's because they're 60 years old. They break down all the time. You have to have parts. But this allows me to grow about 9 or 10 miles of crops and with very little hand tillage. So we have everything set out on these, like I said, 44-inch centers. And I grow cover crops, we mow everything down, and then the field is bare, and then I make these rows with the middle busters behind the tractor. And everything is set on these 44-inch rows. This happens to be probably corn, maybe winter squash and tomatoes and stuff. But it doesn't matter. I do it all with that one machine. So everything's on that same spacing. It's wasteful when it comes to onions. We're going to talk about onions here in a minute. I've tried growing them in beds, and the hand weeding was just too much. I couldn't keep up with it. I can grow them with that tractor in these big long rows and keep it pretty clean. So of all the crops we grow on the farm, I would say onions require the most hand hoeing. I've grown these things for 50 years, and I'm telling you one thing. Don't let weeds get in your onions. Even at the end, like a lot of crops, towards the end of the year, you let the weeds grow up, and it doesn't bother a butternut squash or corn or something. You can get weeds taller than the corn and still get good corn. That doesn't work with onions. You'll get onions, but they will rot. You have to keep them weed-free the whole time that you're growing them. So we use primarily compost made from our cows, and that's sort of the basis of our fertility program is cattle. I want to stress sort of 3 things: soil biology, mineralization, and tillage. So we're going to talk about all those things. So the biology for any kind of agriculture generally stems from the stomach of a cow, where grass is eaten and it stays in the cow for over 2 weeks and goes through 4 stomachs and comes out this pudding that's just exactly what the elemental beings and plants want, is this beautiful manure from the cows. And you know, you can read about these things in ancient literature, the Bible and things like that. Everything's all about cows. So I got a farm 50 years ago. You saw the picture of it from the aerial view. And my father said, "Oh, you got a farm. You have to get cattle." And I was young and dumb. And I was like, "I don't want to get cattle. I want to grow vegetables." And he was like, "Well, what are you going to do with all that grass, you know?" And so I got cows, and they kept getting out of the fence. Yeah, I'm sure many of you have cows, and you know what I'm talking about. They were trying to teach me rotational grazing. It took me a long time to figure that out. But cows don't need to stay in the same place. Cows have to move from field to field, and that is the basis of agriculture. That's how soils have been maintained, their fertility, for thousands of years. Mind you, the synthesis of nitrogen happened about 100 years ago. Before that, every bit of nitrogen, which is the limiting factor not only in agriculture, but almost any chemical reaction, nitrogen is a limiting factor. Every bit of that had to come from growing cattle and legumes, which consequently kept land fertile. Cover crops are an extremely important part of what we do. So every year, a field will get a crop or two and a cover crop or two. Basically, where we live, we have 3 growing seasons. We have a spring, a summer, and a fall. And so this field was probably in summer vegetables. This is a fall picture. So if I'm done with the crop somewhere between August 15th and September 15th, it goes into crimson clover. When I do that, I have about a half a 5-gallon bucket full of buckwheat. I throw in about a gallon of crimson clover seed and maybe a handful or 2 of daikon, turnip, kale, some sort of brassica. The buckwheat immediately sprouts up and gets about this tall and then dies when the frosts come, in which case the brassicas, the turnips or daikons or kale, take over the field, and then the winter kills them, and the crimson clover then comes up in the spring and makes this beautiful field. This field is, as soon as it gets looking really pretty, that's when I want to go mow it and cover it in shit. That's what I do for a living. But at this point, we're ready to do the spring planting. On the right and the left, you'll see the turnips blooming in the wheat over there to the left. And those spots of land probably didn't come out of production in time to get crimson clover started, so I planted wheat, peas. That would be like an Austrian field pea, or rye, purple hairy vetch. But I always try to have a mixture of cover crops. So it's not just like one thing. There's like a whole lot of different things growing. So it's the roots of plants that make soil. So starting 50 years ago, I thought that soil grew plants. No, plants grow soil. And as farmers, our job is to get as much sugar production from photosynthesis going through our plants and coming out as root exudates and feeding the soil microbiology that we can actually be able to do what we need to do. So I want to talk a little bit about the minerals that we add, but this is a list up here of biological stimulants. I think it's important to realize that, like on my farm, and I'm pretty sure your all's farms, the soil was about 2 feet taller than where it is right now. Our the people before us really screwed up the land. They plowed up and down. These hills on the side, they're like a 45-degree angle. And the 91-year-old guy said, yeah, we took the mule up there and plowed straight down the hill. Back in the, you know. And he said the whole creek down there just filled up with mud about that deep. And they did this year after year to grow corn that wasn't as big as that thing right there. It was, we were rough on the land during the 19th century. But also, we learned how to farm. And the lessons that I've gleaned from reading and studying the way people farm before chemicals really hit home with me, and that's how I farm. It's an old-time farming methods. This is putting some wood ashes or lime or something on the field in the wintertime over a cover crop. So whenever, as organic farmers, we're using what we grow our crops with, compost, wood chips, cover crops, we're adding carbon. Carbon is acidic. We have to balance carbon with some sort of alkaline to keep our soils in shape for growing plants, and the pH up. So we have to use lime, wood ashes, rock phosphates, some sort of alkaline calcareous substance to balance the carbonaceous things that we put on with our compost and our cover crops. So there's a lot of different kinds of these rock dusts. We use lime, a couple tons to the acre every few years. If your land has too much magnesium, you want to use a high calcium lime. If it is lacking magnesium, you use a dolomitic lime. I love wood ashes. We like to have parties, have a big bonfire, and then we sprinkle the ashes, back on the fields. And if I go visit my friend in Georgia, I might come back with some granite meal. If you're ever up in Massachusetts, make sure you grab a bag or two of basalt. All of these rocks are native to somewhere, but they're not native other places. And so one of the best things for our farm is granite and basalt, or phosphates and things that come from other places. And these azomite planters, there's all kinds of rock dust. I can't stress, it's very important for us in the southeast to use rock dusts because we didn't have the glacial activity that happened in the Midwest and many places. It's been 1 million years since we've had a glacier. So our soils are lacking minerals. These rocks have those minerals in them. And through the use of compost, tillage, and biology, we can open up the soils where carbonic acid forms when it rains and dissolves the minerals in the rocks. But we are in a situation where we need a kickstart. We have to help that process out. We want to get the microbes that can eat the rocks and make these minerals available. And the way we do that is using the rock dusts that then not necessarily as much feeds our crop as it feeds the microbes in our soils, that those are how our crops get fed. So I'm pretty sure around here y'all have to put lime on every few years. My soils go downhill big time. Go ahead.
No, mine is like almost. My soil is very a lot of calcium, like 8 pH already. So
Around here.
yes, we're, limestone. Yeah. So, but obviously it's already there. So I do other things instead. So.
I feel like whenever I leave very far from my home that I have no idea what I'm talking about. But this is what we want, is some good soil. And so those plants are making the soil. So soils are made by plants growing and being mown or grazed, and then the roots die, and then they grow more, and it continues, repeats itself. And what we're looking for is that chocolate cake crumb-like structure. And we'll talk later about why that's so important for moisture. Well, I might even mention, we've been growing 100,000 pounds of produce every year for 30 years. We do not use any irrigation. No black plastic mulches, no hoop houses. This is all done with the equipment that my neighbors have been using for 100 years. And it was important for me to farm using what my neighbors had rather than going and buying a bunch of new stuff. Well, I didn't have any money either. But so, you know, you see some of the grasses that's how soils are built. Grasses and clovers grow, they're mown, they make this black humus. We have to be very careful once we have that, because we can destroy it really easily. The two worst things are excessive tillage and the use of nitrates. So I'm going to tell you that nitrogen, 78% of the air, the limiting factor. Nitrogen is an agricultural byproduct. It is not an input. Don't ever put nitrogen on your land. Grow it. Legumes, cattle, composts. And when you do that, your crops are getting their nitrogen from amino acids, which is the byproduct of protozoa eating the bacteria and fungal activity that happens through the root exudates. A plant can't use nitrate. It has to convert it to amino acids. So when we put nitrates on the land, and this can be not only ammonium nitrate and that stuff, it can be fresh manure or fish emulsion or, you know, composted poultry litter. A lot of things have nitrates. And what happens then is that those nitrates mess up the activity of silica, which is the coating of the vascular bundles and the fungal hyphae that run through the soil. And so we have hydrogen coming from the sun, joining with carbon dioxide and making sugars that go through the plant and come out as root exudates and feed the soil biology. That's what we're doing as farmers. We're growing sugar. And the care of these microorganisms is our primary concern. Don't worry about your crop. Worry about your microorganisms. They're the ones that are growing the crops. We, as farmers, are either hindering that or helping that. And so everything I do on the farm screws something up and makes other things better. That's the nature of farming. It's, like I say, it's one disaster after another. There's always things going on that you don't want, but it's a farm. But on the other hand, there's always some good things going on, too. So here I have some good stuff going on. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to plow it. But whenever I plow the land, I kind of put my hand out like this and say, okay, Mother Nature, I'm going to mess you up, but I promise to put back compost, cover crops, minerals, and I'm going to heal what I've done. So the cover crops, I'm sure you all are familiar with the various things, the brassicas, the grains, clovers, buckwheat. In the summertime we grow those, in the wintertime we grow those. If I'm going to put it back into lay for a few years, I'll sow some red clover. All this stuff on the land, but it doesn't. I'm putting on like a ground rock. I'm putting on a ground rock. It doesn't do any good until I get the biology going. You know, so that's why we have to use the compost in conjunction with cover crops. The roots of those cover crops are what's making the fertility for next year's crop. So farming is basically historically about families and raising kids. And if you have your farm for future fertility, you're not farming for that crop that year. You're farming for years and years ahead. For crop rotations, remineralizing, and are we on? I'll just yell if this goes off. Yeah. So. Okay. So grow cover crops. I try to do that like 2 or 3 crops, cover crops for every crop that I'm growing for market. And so I'm always trying to grow soil microorganisms, a byproduct of my insane affection for growing vegetables. I get these vegetables out of the deal. But mostly what I want to do is grow soil microorganisms. And we do this through crop rotation. So this is a field that I just bush hogged, and I ran the chisel plow through. And so this is I'm getting ready to plant onions the next year. This will be the fall. So that looks like a mess. So a lot of the pictures that I showed look like I got it together, but I don't. It's a mess. And I think it's important to realize that our farms are not only alive in space, they're alive in time. And every spot on my farm sometimes looks really nice, and other times looks like crap. And that's okay. That's the nature of farming. So in this situation, I've just bush hogged, looks like sweet potatoes or something like that. And then I ran the chisel plow through it, and then I do one of the things that's the most hardest thing for a farmer or gardener to do, and that is I have to do nothing. I just have to not do anything. I let that sit for a week. When I go through it again, it busts up beautifully. And so what I'm doing is I'm letting the microbes do the tillage for me. All summer long, they've been growing sweet potatoes or butternut squash, a lot of weeds, and this kind of stuff. And then when I mow it, all of a sudden those sugars are not going back and feeding those microbes that were living off of those plant root exudates. Then I go through with the cultivator. So all the microbes are going, no food, and all of a sudden I've been tilled. So those microbes then, at this time of year, shift, and they want to do something else. The wintertime microbiology happens, and it's very different in the winter than the summer, just like it's different at night than it is during the day. So these processes that happen in the soil all happen at night. That's why they call it nitrogen. It happens at night. Mineral release, all of the things that are going on in the soil happen when the tension releases in the plant. That sun that kept us growing all day long is not there anymore, and we relax, and these things flow out of the roots, and they feed the microorganisms. The reason that silica is so important in agriculture is because it's the coating, it's the skin of the vascular bundles and the fungal hyphae. It's a tube that runs from the leaf through the vascular phloem down into the roots, comes out as root exudates, and feeds these fungal hyphae that then go through the ground all over the farm. And there's a connection between everything on the farm and what's happening in the garden. The fertility generated by those trees ends up in the garden through the taxi service, so to speak, of all the birds and mammals and insects that are moving around. And so what we have then is when the silica is alive, the nutrients inside the phloem and the fungal hyphae can't get out because there's this siliceous coating that silica, it's a crystal. It's like half of the Earth's crust, and it's the oxide of silicon. And so we destroy that through tillage and using the nitrates. So we have to be really careful with how we fertilize and how we till. So when I fertilize, I'm using a humified compost that's been sitting for years, and it doesn't smell bad at all. It actually smells good. And when I till, I go slow. I plow the land like I'm turning over a sleeping grandbaby, and you're just real gentle with it. And so, and these things took me a long time to learn. Believe me, I was young and dumb and fast and plowed and plow, and I'd whip that ground up and make what I thought was good soil structure, and then it would rain and turn to concrete. I had to learn all this stuff the hard way. But what we want to do is let the roots of our plants make soil, make that soil structure, not just fertility, but the actual crumb structure. And that's what allows me to grow so much produce without any irrigation, because the crumbs then allow subsoil moisture to come back up as my crop is growing during the summer and drying up the land around it. The reason that it can flow from the subsoil up to the plants is because when the plants use the moisture, they dry that soil out. And if you have something dry and something wet, the moisture will seep up through capillary action. And so what we're doing is we're trying to form a soil that allows capillary action to wick away moisture when there's rains too much, and to bring subsoil moisture back in when it's dry. And this is the way people have farmed for thousands and thousands of years. We have got to move our crops around from one field to the other. And mind you, you may be thinking, this has nothing to do with onions. But it really does. I'll come to that. But the field preparation is so important. I just feel like I have we have to go through this, because the onions are a byproduct of years of work beforehand. Otherwise, the onions are not going to do well, in my experience. So yeah, we have crop rotations on the farm. It's about a 4-year rotation. It's written right there. Every crop leaves the land ready for the next crop. So onions in the crop rotation have got to follow clean cultivation. You have to have land that you've cultivated the year before and gotten rid of a lot of the weeds. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting weeds the whole time. So we like to put onions out early so that's one of the few crops that I won't grow a cover crop in the fall for. I open the land up and leave it ready for the first crop, because there's no sense in growing a cover crop if you're going to be plowing it March 15th. You might as well just have the land open. It will dry quicker and you'll be able to get your crop in early, which is important for a crop like onions in where we live at. I'm going to go through some of the equipment we use on our farm. And you might notice that it's all old. You might notice that I'm old. I don't mind saying that I'm old. I didn't like it when Ellen said I was old the other day. But yeah, I've been around a long time. And I've found that this old equipment suits what I want to do. But the reason I chose to use this old equipment was because I wanted to make a living farming, and I wanted to use the tools that my neighbors used and not have like new fancy stuff that was different. They were growing tobacco with the same tools that I'm growing vegetables with. And that was important for me. I don't know if it still is, but it's what I have now. So yeah, this is a Farmall 140 tractor. They made these Farmalls back in the 50s. They made a Cub, a Super A, this, that, and the other. And when they made this one, I think 1958, they made the same tractor for another almost 20 years. 6 million of these tractors are out there, and nobody wants them. They're a one-row tobacco for an acre of tobacco. That's what they're for. So they're cheap. You can pick these up for $2,000 or $2,500, and I can make $10,000, $15,000 an acre with that thing right there. So on the back here, we have what we call middle busters, and that would be these things right here. And so once I chiseled the field like you saw in that picture with the sweet potato debris, and I let it set for maybe a week or so, and then when I go through it again with the chisel plow, it busts up because the microbes have taken care of part of that decomposition process. And so the first time I go through it, it's like you put the rebreaker down, you go about 10 feet, clogs up, you back up, and it's like it takes a long time, and you're cursing, and then you realize, oh, well, all this organic matter is what I'm doing this for. And then it's like, gosh dang it, and back up. And yeah, so, but the second time I go through, it all busts up because it's had that microbial activity for a week. And then the third time I go through with a harrow behind it, and then the field's relatively clean, not really, but I learned a long time ago that you don't want to go over your field a whole lot before you plant. You do minimal tillage, just enough, but go really slow and be really gentle and realize that you're hurting things. So make sure you promise nature you're going to put on compost, you're going to grow cover crops, everything's going to be all right, but yeah, you're going to sacrifice some microbes to get a crop. That's the way it goes. So after I make the rows, we'll set out the onions or whatever the crop is, and then I go through with there's 6 tines in the front, and so I put those down, and then it's time I straddle the row, and that then covers up the seed or the plants. So whenever we plant something like an onion where you're transplanting, you're tromping the soil. You have to cultivate that and fluff it up before it rains, or you're going to be screwed. Because once it rains and the soil is packed, Mother Nature's going to say, oh, you need some weeds. And you will get weeds. Some of the other tools I use, this is a mold board plow. I only use this in the fall on sod. I flip the sod over, and then I don't do anything. And the winter freezing and thawing of the moisture that soaks into the clods then pulverizes that soil and tills it in a way that no piece of metal can ever do. And so we want to, as much as possible, let the forces of nature, whether it be the weather or the microbes, that's who we want to do the tillage for us. We're just trying to help it along. So when we use the moldboard plow, the layers of soil shift and incorporates air. The problem is that most people don't know how to set the plow so it doesn't totally flip the land over and bury the organic matter, but leaves it about 3/4 of the way flipped over, and so that it's not like burying all that organic matter, which in an anaerobic situation turns to alcohols and formaldehydes and things like that. We want to actually keep the soil open, and so we don't flip it all the way over. Once I've flipped over a sod, I don't ever use that tool. I use this one over here. It's called a chisel plow, and it has springs and these shanks. And as you're moving forward, the springs widen and the shanks go backwards, and then eventually the spring snaps forward, and you have an action that's kind of like this. It's going through. It's not like going through like this. It's actually going like this. And so it's cracking between the foot apart tines under the soil about 10 inches. It cracks it laterally, and that incorporates enough air where you don't actually have to flip the soil over, which I really don't want to do. So that's the tool I use, called a chisel plow or a tiller or a rebreak or things like that in nature. And then I follow it with a harrow. That's that tool right over there. So when I'm talking to people, a lot of times I might say, there's your, if you're a gardener, that's your shovel, that's your garden fork, and this over here would be your rake. And so all the things that we do farming can be done just in a garden, and that's how I started as a gardener. It was years before I got a tractor and all this equipment. You know, I just did it by hand. I'm sure some of you might be in that position. Up here we have a manure spreader. So I think I mentioned I put about 30 tons per acre per year. I study old farming books, and I hope you have a chance to come up and look at these books. And they talk about, they wouldn't grow a garden unless they had 75 tons of fermented manure every year. Otherwise, why grow a garden? They put lots of compost on. And when you do that, when I went from what I thought was liberal, which would be maybe 5 tons, to up to 30 tons or 40 tons, holy moly. Drought, no problem. Insects, I don't see any. Too much moisture, no problem. Because of the humus formation, buffers against all those problems. So, again, these two things are horse-drawn tools. So over here is a hiller. Okay, that doesn't have anything to do with onions, so I can skip over this slide, and we don't need the potato digger either, so we'll just keep going. Yeah, and so I think it's important as farmers to also respect gardeners. So all gardeners need a farm, and farmers actually need some gardeners. So we need to work together. But these are some of the hand tools that I just leaned up against the barn and took a picture of. The garden forks, the rakes, y'all know that curved fork? You ever use one of those? For onions, that's the ticket, man. You can go in an onion field with that, and you can just go, across, where the rows are going this way, you go crossways with it, and it hardly ever hits the onion. It just goes to the side, and it's pretty good. And then the pointed hoe is actually called an onion hoe or a Warren hoe. And that's my favorite tool because not only can you use the point, you can turn it 90 degrees and you've got a flat side like a regular hoe, or you can turn it upside down and you got like 3 little points that you can use. So the different hoes are cool. The one on the left I got that from Joel out there. It has a three-pronged fork on one side and a hoe on the other. So as you're working, you can flip it over and get kind of the best of both worlds. The tall one he sold me several years ago, and I still haven't quite got the hang of it. You ever use one of those? It's like a dance. You take this thing like this, and you go like this. I'm almost used to, this is how I hoe. But it's a different kind of movement that it's easier on your back, but it takes a little bit of time to figure it out. Yeah. So, and this is about storage. So, I think it was when you were at the farm. We grew all those potatoes that year, and all of a sudden I had like 100 bushels of potatoes, and I didn't have any place to put them. I had totally forgot that it was like one of my first successful crops where I had all this stuff, and like, oh, I don't have we had a cave. We used a cave. We put it in a cave that was on the farm. But eventually I got a cellar for the potatoes, and this is a barn loft, so we're talking about onions. And so you can see how how much air can flow through those slats in the barn. So we built it with green lumber, which of course shrunk, and we have about a quarter or half-inch slot between each board, which the same thing on the floor, so it makes a lot of airflow. And I can't stress the importance of ventilation enough in any kind of storage situation. So there's two kinds of onions. You have your, that we're going to talk about, long day and intermediate days. And there's the short days. And so the long day onions are something that's grown in Texas or Georgia where they have longer, no, those would be the short days, excuse me. The shorter days. The long days would be the ones up north where summer has longer days. And so we're in the middle. We're intermediate. I have found that I can't grow the short day ones like Bermudas and things that would grow in Texas or Georgia, but I can grow the long day varieties, and the intermediate varieties. So after years and years of varieties, we've chosen candy as the variety that we use. And this is a red candy and yellow candy. And we also grow a Walla Walla. It's a big onion. It's one of those onions you can eat, just like an apple. It's not real hot, but it doesn't store very well. And so this is where I put the onions on top of hay. So this, I found that when I put the onions right on the floor, that they're moist and they sink down a little bit, and it gets a little flat spot, and that will go bad. Whereas if I put them on hay, it's like, it's just softer. We start onions in what we call a cold frame. And so this is another old-time practice. I get some horse manure from the neighbors, and I put a big pile of horse manure down, and then I build some kind of simple box and put old window frames on top of it. And that's either called a hotbed or a cold frame. And the horse manure then warms up and heats up the insides of the cold frame there. And we just sow these onion seeds in November. If I had a greenhouse, we could probably sow them more like January or something, but I don't have a hoop house, and this is the way we do it. And, this thing has to happen in the fall. I'm a farmer. Does it happen every year? Nope. So then we buy plants. And so I'll end up buying the boxes of the bunched plants. But obviously growing them yourself is going to save you some money, and of course you know what you're getting. You don't really know when you buy something. So you just have to plant the seed and hoe it out, basically. The cold frame soil would be sand and compost, good soil mixed together, maybe some leaf mold and that kind of stuff. And then we put the onions out. So what I've been doing over the last 10 or 15 years is planting 2 plants in the same hole. And then rather than going 5 inches away and planting a plant, I go 10 inches away and plant 2 more. And this gives me the ability to cultivate with the hoe so much easier than having them be real close together. I'm wasting a lot of space here, and generally speaking, I wish that wasn't the case. But I've tried different ways of keeping onions clean, and I can't do it unless I put them on this same system that I'm growing everything else on. So as farmers, we develop systems that work on our farms. And if you want to do something difficult, try to change a farmer's mind. It's really hard. We are so stubborn. This is the way I do it. It's not perfect, but it's just the way I do it. And I can keep them clean because I can go through with a tractor. And in farming, we want harvest to be 50% of our labor. If you're working more than 50% to get to harvest, you're working too hard. We have to be really careful with our labor. We have to be very efficient. And we have to get help. So we set the onion plants out 2 in each hole, you know, we've made rows with the 140, and so we just set them in there, and it's generally speaking 2 people with the setter, and someone comes behind and throws the dirt back on them. And then if it looks like it's going to be dry, we water them. And this is going down to the creek, the 5-gallon buckets in the back of a tub, and putting water into the tub, coming back and watering them, giving each one a little shot of water. Obviously, we would rather plant before a rain event, so we don't have to do that. So generally, we put the onions out March 15th or so. So it's pretty likely we're going to get some rain pretty soon. It's rare that we don't get a rain every week in the spring. But yeah, that's the only watering that they'll get, though. And then immediately, I run the cultivators through because we've tromped the soil. So wherever you step on the soil, you've crunched a bunch of soil microbes, and you have created a spot where soil moisture can evaporate. And that's not allowed on our farm because we don't irrigate. It's really important that every bit of water that leaves my land doesn't go right to the atmosphere. It goes through a plant and leaves through transpiration. So I have to be careful about keeping the land in a loose and fluffy condition just for the top inch or so, or 2 inches. It doesn't have to be very deep. But that's going over it like that checks evaporation and keeps that moisture in the ground so it can come up through capillary action when the soil dries out. So it's I would say that onions require more hand labor than almost any of the crops we grow. A potato is so easy to grow, or a butternut squash. They pop out of the ground and immediately they have big leaves that shade out the grass and stuff. These don't even hardly have leaves. And you have to get in there. And we always try to hoe before we ever see any weeds. So I'll go in a field like this, and I'll take some young people out there, and I say, we're going to hoe that field. And they go like, what do you mean hoe the field? There's no weeds in it. So then it's like, okay, everybody on your knees. And they get down and look at it, and there's all these little green dots that are going to become a real problem. But before a weed has developed its true leaves, when it's just in the cotyledon stage, and you can go through the field the time that it would take if you started letting those weeds get even this tall. Then you actually have to work. So we want to hoe before we see the weeds. Just know that any time you have bare ground, weeds are going to sprout. Charles Darwin, a really cool scientist, took a teaspoon of soil and sprouted 561 plants out of it. That's how many weed seeds were in it. There's a lot of weed seeds out there, and I don't care how you compost or whatever you do. Where I live at, you're going to have weeds. And particularly when you bare the soil, which is a big no-no in nature. Nature, abhors a vacuum. And so I'm creating conditions for weeds. So I have to stay on top of the weeds. They will, and so, whereas potatoes, I might not ever hoe, I don't ever hoe potatoes. It's all done mechanically with the hillers and the cultivators. Butternuts, maybe hoe them once or twice. Sweet potatoes, 2 or 3 times. Onions, 6 to 8 times we have to go through it to hoe it out. And you just can't let the weeds grow. Even at the end of the year, I'll let the weeds grow up, and the onions won't store. They want it to be like Texas or Georgia, dry, hot. That's what they want. They want moist, cool to grow, and they want this dry, hot to mature. Unlike the New World crops that we talked about Thursday, this is an old world crop. One of the oldest cultivated crops that we've been growing, thousands of years, and it does not want to be hilled. It wants the soil pulled away from the shoulders of the plant. And so the final onion is halfway out of the ground. And that's the way they like to mature. Many of the other crops we grow, corn and other things, they like the soil pulled up to them. But beets and carrots and stuff, they'd rather have their shoulders exposed. So for the last hoeing, we're pulling the soil away rather than bringing it to the crop. So this is the storage. We wait till about half of the tops are dying. We grow through the field and we step on them and push them over. This really irked my father when my grandmother would go through his garden and step on the onions. And this was an old world method that she couldn't even speak English. She was doing this stuff. He was like, what the hell? But it actually turns out it was the way to do it. Because what happens is you stop the flow of the carbohydrates going through the phloem and coming back up the xylem because you've broke that vascular bundle system, and then it sends a signal to the plant to cure and to make a skin, and it's like, okay, we're not going to go to seed. We're going to have to make a bulb that lasts till next year, and that's what we're looking for. Robin just pointed out that we're close to the end, and so I think it's probably appropriate that we just open it up for questions and answers at this point, right? Yeah. So I'm counting on y'all to ask a question so I have something to talk about.
Repeat the question into the microphone. Will you do that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. What is your question, sir?
I always have trouble getting onions to last. So I always think about, because I grow candy like you.
Yeah.
I tried other varieties that say they're going to last long, but they always get mixed.
use part of that early spring. The deliveries when you don't have any vegetables, and maybe some lettuce and green onions and radishes. So, in that case, I plant them, I make a furrow, I get a 32-pound sack of onions, and I go like that. That's on, and yeah, they're not all pointing upward. But you just make an onion, if they're pointing downwards, it just makes an onion that goes like that. It's got a little curve in it. And nobody cares. It's got a little curve in it. So it's still a perfectly good onion. But for storage onions, generally speaking, you want to grow them from seed. And I think that maybe one of my problems is I'm leaving them in the loft too long, they're too hot, and that they should go to a cooler storage area. But I don't really have a good place that's dry enough. Where I grow like potatoes is a little bit damp. So, and I don't have a walk-in cooler, but I think that with a walk-in cooler you could actually extend a storage capacity for probably several months. Any more questions? Yeah, there's a few.
In your cold frames, are you putting your soil mix on top of the horse manure, or how do you actually?
Yeah, so he's in the coal frames. I put the horse manure down, and that's for heat. So I have to put soil on top of that, maybe 4 or 5 inches, and then if I have any money, I might buy a little bit of potting mix to go on top because it will save me a lot of weeding. But oftentimes I don't have the money in the spring. It's kind of a dry time. Yeah. Is there any reason why I don't mulch my onions? So I mulched my onions early on in my career, and it happened to be a wet year, and everything went south. And so I've always thought of onions as this cool weather crop. It doesn't get a frost, it can take all that stuff. But it really wants to ripen in dry, hot sun. And a mulch, of course, doesn't allow that to happen. So I think they like the dry, hot, no weeds situation during their last month. Late June rains will ruin an onion crop. And so it's better to try to get those out of the ground, even if they're not fully matured, and have good, smaller onions rather than trying to wait a few weeks and having big ones that the outer layer is moist and they rot, yeah. So I haven't had luck mulching onions. Another question? In the back. Yeah. Yeah. So she's wondering how to store the onions once she's grown them. She's harvested them. It's July. Traditionally, they're braided. We let the tops dry for a month or so, and then we braid them and hang them up and put them on the porch. Or if we don't have the wherewithal and time to braid them, we'll just tie them in bunches, maybe 6 or 8 in a bunch. And as a farmer, I have a lot of square bales hay that I use the twines. And so I take one of those twines, it's about 6 feet long, and tie a bunch of onions on one end, tie a bunch of onions on the other end, and throw it over the rafter of the barn. And they can sit there and pretty much until it starts freezing outside. Yeah. Wireworm? Yeah, so wireworm is the larva of the click beetle. I don't know if you've ever seen these little brown beetles and you put them and they click and they bounce up. Yeah, so that makes the wireworm. So all insects are beneficial. They're there to teach us a lesson. Wireworms and click beetles come when our soil is compacted and we don't have the proper tilth. Now there's other insects that come when you don't have proper fertility, but that one in particular is the ground is compacted. Mother Nature is saying, get some insects in there. The coating of the click beetle is silica. You know, maybe we've put nitrates on, maybe we've tilled excessively, and we've destroyed or had this antagonistic relationship with the silica in the soils. And so Mother Nature says, oh, well, bring in some silica insects, and they'll grow, they'll die, and they'll add silica. So they're actually helping you. It's really hard to lose your crop and then have to turn around and thank Mother Nature. But that's what we have to do, because they're teaching us something. And so whenever we have the beetle type of insects, it's a sign of soil compaction. Whenever we have leaf-eating insects, it's a sign of nitrates, too much nitrate. That would be like aphids or things of this nature. So, you know, we just have to learn from the insects where we fucked up. You know, they will tell you. Another question, please.
Is this on?
Yeah, so the question is, where did I get my equipment and how did I learn to work on it? And boy, yeah, so like I was saying earlier, I got most of my equipment from neighbors and local auctions, and it was what was around. I've had sessions like this, people will say, well, why don't you use a flail more, or why don't you use this, that, or the other? And I'm like, well, I can't afford it. I'm using stuff that I get for pretty cheap. How did I learn to work on it? Lots of red knuckles and just beating on stuff. But when you get these, is this on? Yeah. When you get these old stuff, it's gonna break. That's just part of it. But they're easy to fix. Like the picture of that tractor. You got your alternator, your oil thing, your starter motor, everything's on the outside. You don't even have to open a hood to get to it. And so, can you get one of these tractors? Yeah. My recommendation is get two, because you're gonna need parts. Believe me, it's a lot of tinkering. My father was a professor before he went back to farming, and I like to say that the only time I ever heard him swear was when he was working on his farm haul tractor. And yeah. Yeah, it's just a matter of doing it. Yeah. I have older neighbors. One of my partners in my farm is 85 years old, and he knows these things, and so I've learned a lot just from my neighbors, really. Yeah. Another question?
Have you ever planted the onions with another crop in the same bed to create like a canopy to reduce the hoeing?
I did, and it didn't work. So the onions really want to have that full sun, that airflow is really important. Whenever you have something else, you're going to block that airflow. It's going to hold dew and make a moisture condition, which is not beneficial for onions in particular. Now, other crops, I do that all the time. Like corn, last cultivation, throw some buckwheat or soybeans or something in, or cowpeas. And so seeding is what she was asking about. And it's a great tool to use in the garden. It doesn't work for onions too good, yeah. Any more? Yeah, there's a question back there. Okay, you're asking whether cutting them rather than just pushing them over. I've tried that, and they don't cure out as well. So there's this, I read it, in a farming book, it might say, pull the onions and let them sit out in the sun for 2 weeks. That doesn't work where I live. You have to get them up the same day because of the dews and the chance of moisture. And so it seems to me like as the onion tops dry out, it's part of the curing process for the onion. If I cut that, it seems like the onions don't keep very well. Have you had any success with cutting them directly? Yeah. The flow. Yeah, you want to break that flow. Somehow bending them over and letting them naturally dry, I think, helps cure the onions. I've noticed the same thing with garlic. You harvest a 1/4 acre of garlic, you put it in the barn, it'd be really handy not to have those tops on it and to cut those off. And so I did that a few years, and they didn't store as well. If I let the tops dry off naturally and hang them, they store really well. I don't really know why, I guess. Yes, back there. Can someone repeat that for me? Yeah, so we might step on them, and then a week later we get them out of the ground. Yeah, so it's not very long. And, there's years when that doesn't happen, but over the last few years, I think that it helps with the curing process to step on them a little bit and break that, yeah. But not very long after that, I'm pulling them out. And again, it's, end of June, whatever, we're all wanting to have a big party and do other things. And so the onions are just one of those things that are part of the annual thing. And so if we can, we go through and step on them, and a week later we pull them up and take them up to the barn in the same day. I don't want to leave them out in the sun at all because they'll get sun scald and things like that. So they need to get, curing them is like a big part of the deal with onions. Yeah. Okay, I'm cut off. Thank you all so much. I hope it was helpful.
Please fill out your surveys. Give them to Katie as you leave the room.
I have old farming books here. You're all welcome to come and look at them. I have biodynamic preparations if anybody wants to take some of that home and sprinkle it on your garden. Can I hang out here a minute? So I'm here.
Yeah, Jeff is going to stay here. Please come to the front of the room and talk to him. I'll just get in trouble if I didn't stop the conversation now.